You know, the problem with people today is nobody wants to work.
What's the purpose of work? Why do I even need to work?
Does anybody want to work anymore?
Deeply anti-work.
Do you know what this company needs to burn down?
Sounds like maybe people are just being lazy. Are you encouraging people to be lazy?
No one seems to want to work anymore. From the I don't dream of labor trend,
trying to liberate us from a life of servitude to companies,
to quiet quitting.
Quiet quitting is just doing the job you were hired to do within the schedule you've been given to do it.
To the great resignation.
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 Not to mention the wave of workers' strikes.
A wave of workers' strikes sweeping across America.
If we have to set out for work a little while, we will.
And we may see more high-profile strikes as unions up their demands.
Something has gone very wrong with work. On this, everyone seems to agree. Less clear is the exact nature of the problem. On the one hand, there are those that blame laziness.
This is just a bunch of slacker employees hiding behind a snappy slogan to make lazy sound better.
The so-called snowflake generation and poor work ethic.
This is the snowflake generation. They have the work ethic of a dead salamander.
On the other hand, there are those that say this is a natural outgrowth of overwork and underpay.
Americans are looking for better pay, better working conditions, and more flexible working arrangements.
The nihilism and hopelessness of younger generations.
Why should I worry about a job when the planet's on fire?
As well as the pandemic, which caused us all to reevaluate life.
COVID was the ultimate reset where people started to ask a bigger question. What do I want for my life? Do I want to continue working the way that I have?
But what I want to talk about today is that on both sides, there are missed areas of analysis. The factors mentioned are symptoms of the problem. There is a much deeper underlying root cause to this crisis. It's not that people don't want to work anymore, it's that we don't dream of the labor we are compelled to do under our capitalist economic system that has created an unjust global work structure, generates endless pointless jobs, and is literally and metaphorically killing us. So first we're going to discuss the capitalist world system of work, what it is, how it functions, and its consequences. Capitalism is an economic system where the maximization of private profit lies at its core. If capitalists don't continuously maximize profits, they'll be pushed out of the market by competition. Any drive to maximize profits necessarily means driving down wages and squeezing as much as possible out of workers.
So you'll just work us to death?
We'll sure try.
Even if there are labor regulations protecting workers' rights, because capitalism has become increasingly global, corporations can resist any regulations by moving companies to a different country. We've already seen this with the mass migration of corporations to the global south, where workers are more easily exploited. As a result, governments often stop implementing workers' regulations because they fear that if they do, capitalists will move to places with more favorable conditions for doing business. And developing nations quickly learned that in order to successfully attract foreign investment, they had to compete with one another on the world stage to drive down wages. It became a global race to the bottom towards ever cheaper labor and ever lower standards.
People are so desperately poor that en masse they're almost willing to work under any conditions. It's not indentured slavery or servitude, but in a way it is. Throughout the supply chain, an incredible amount of money is being made by these brands. A significant amount of money is being made by the factories. The workers are nowhere near a living wage, and that's where the margins are.
Capitalism also needs to create a global reserve army of laborers, unemployed and underemployed people, in order to sustain itself. Unemployment levels in places like ancient Greece or medieval China were virtually non-existent. High unemployment is a problem peculiar to capitalism. According to the philosopher André Gortz in Critique of Economic Reason, unemployment was invented because it disciplines and disempowers workers. It serves as a warning to the non-poor that their fates could be much worse. It keeps their aspirations in check and makes them fear for losing their jobs, so they are less likely to unionize and more willing to accept unfavorable conditions. If they do demand more, they can simply be replaced by one of the many members of the reserve army desperate for any kind of employment. It also serves the purpose of keeping wages low for scarce work to survive. If one person decides to leave, capitalists need not fear. They have a large pool of unemployed and underemployed people to pull from. So, poor working conditions, underemployment, and unemployment are not coincidences. The system literally cannot function without it. Capitalism has essentially been deepening income inequality and poverty across the globe, as well as the centralization of wealth within the capitalist class in order to sustain itself. The activist Eugene Debs, famous for his unionizing efforts, put it succinctly when he wrote, "I am opposing a social order in which it is possible for one man who does absolutely nothing that is useful to amass a fortune of hundreds of millions of dollars, while millions of men and women who work all the days of their lives secure barely enough for a wretched existence." Unfortunately, the trouble with work under capitalism doesn't end with the way the world system is set up. The capitalist workplace also has detrimental consequences for workers. A capitalist workplace is one where there is a strict hierarchy between the boss at the top and the workers below. Instead of the money generated being distributed equitably between all the workers, the owner gets to reap all the profits. Workers have to obey orders no matter what. The boss dictates what we wear, what emotions we display, when we can go to the bathroom and when we can go home. Dissent and disobedience are punished. Workers are kept under constant surveillance, spied on by snitches and supervisors, and bosses deliberately utilize dehumanizing strategies to keep us in place, exercising power, control, manipulation, professional negging, and preying on our insecurities.
Almost everybody spends most of their life living in a totalitarian system. It's called having a job. When you have a job, you're under total control of the masters of the enterprise. They determine what you wear, when you go to the bathroom, what you do. The very idea of a wage contract is selling yourself into servitude.
Well, you're free to leave at any time.
Yes, you're free to starve. That's exactly right. You have a choice between starving or selling yourself to a tyranny.
You can find the same sort of hierarchy, discipline, and dehumanization in an office or factory as you do in a prison.
You got outdoors time? Michael, why don't we get outdoors time?
In fact, the French philosopher Michel Foucault and others have pointed out the creation of prisons and factories coincided, consciously borrowing from each other's control techniques. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, not all jobs suck. You just need to find something you're passionate about that brings you meaning. And sure, there are some people that love their jobs. Of course, there are always exceptions. But I would say, even if you have a job that is relatively satisfying, like being a nurse, a cook, or YouTube influencer, you are pigeonholed into one role that you usually have to redo over and over again at an unsustainable pace, to the point of monotony, boredom, and exhaustion that it no longer becomes enjoyable.
Your job sounds awful.
Well, of course it's awful. It's a job.
Sadly, the problem extends beyond the workplace itself. Free time off isn't really free at all. It's time spent preparing for work, training for work, or recovering from work. Many of us bring work home, checking and answering emails all hours of the day and night. Underpay forces us to have side hustles and take on gig work, resulting in what some commentators have called the lost weekend, with devastating results for relationships, friendships, and family life. And work culture has now also infested our psyches to such an extent that we think we are only good when we get things done. We feel compelled to check things off the to-do list at all times.
Those motivational talks and those articles you read on LinkedIn about productivity.
All the stuff you would, could, should, need to, might, ought to. All the stuff piling up in your in-baskets and emails while I'm speaking right now.
It's a trap.
So not only is the capitalist workplace an unjust class structure under which the masses of the world's population must hustle a living, but now work is no longer just relegated to the workplace. Screw all this talk about developing work-life balance. Work and life has become one and the same thing. It didn't need to be this way. In the year 1930, the economist John Maynard Keynes predicted that by century's end, technology would have advanced to such an extent that countries like the US and Great Britain would have achieved a 15-hour work week. Many contemporary experts have argued there's every reason to believe he was right. Technology-wise, we are more than capable of this. And yet it didn't happen. Instead, technology has been used to increase unemployment and make us all work more. Instead of shortening the working week and raising wages, companies have just snuffled up all the profits.
The technology that was supposed to free us from the drudgery of labor has not done so. It's denied us, and thereby made a kind of mockery of the whole idea of real time off, real leisure, because it has been used to enhance profits, not to enhance the work-life balance.
And rather than allowing for a reduction in working hours to free up the world's population to pursue our pleasures and passions, we've instead seen a mass increase in pointless jobs that make absolutely no positive difference to the world whatsoever.
What do you do?
It doesn't really matter.
Are we consultants?
Can I ask you a question?
Aren't most people consultants?
Who is Tim? Does he exist? What would you say you do here?
The anthropologist David Graeber, in his book Bullshit Jobs, aptly wrote, "It's as if someone were out there making up pointless jobs just for the sake of keeping us all working." According to his estimations, at least half of the jobs in the UK and US could be eliminated without making any real difference at all. For Graeber, the answer to the conundrum as to why we haven't gotten a 15-hour work week is because
the thing that people in power fear the most is a population that, has basic security and time. Like, what's going to happen when robots replace all the jobs? We thought the hippies are bad. What happens when the entire proletariat turns into hippies? Oh my God, it's going to be a disaster.
Basically, working people could start doing something evil with our time if we weren't kept constantly busy with work. Perhaps we would have time to hold the powers that be accountable for things like climate catastrophe, the housing crisis, and mass homelessness. As it now stands, most of us are far too busy and exhausted from work to give these things much thought at all. Perhaps even more insidious, the reason we are kept busy by pointless as opposed to useful jobs is because capitalism is based around profit rather than human need. Very few jobs exist for things that actually matter in life, like giving people access to mental health resources and therapy, or helping us to raise the next generation because we're all so exhausted from raising kids, or tackling environmental disaster so we don't end up in apocalypse. What does it say about our society that it seems to generate an extremely limited demand for talented poet-musicians, but an apparently infinite demand for specialists in corporate law? This situation is understandably making many of us miserable. But instead of pointing our fingers at the real culprits, Graeber says our anger, resentment, and hatred has paradoxically been redirected towards those who are actually doing meaningful work. For example, there seems to be a direct correlation between how useful your job is for society, like being a teacher, cleaner, nurse, or rubbish collector, and how little you are paid for it. A world without teachers or dock workers would soon be in trouble, but it's not entirely clear how humanity would suffer were all the private equity CEOs, lobbyists, PR researchers, actuaries, telemarketers, bailiffs, or legal consultants to similarly vanish.
Some of the stupidest and most obnoxious people in our society are treated as its paragons of virtue, and the most decent and caring people are regularly made to feel, not only made to do all the work, but made to feel that they're of no account and their lives and their feelings don't matter. I mean, it's a system of incredible violence that we live under.
At the same time, if we hate our work lives, we are taught to see it as a personal failing. And whole industries have sprouted to help us take personal responsibility and pull ourselves together, like the multi-billion-dollar self-help industry, time management resources, and commodified self-care. And perhaps most ironically, many of us have come to believe that the way to solve the problem of overwork is to work even more.
Rise and grind. All men are created equal. Some just work harder. Now, if you want to be broke for the rest of your life, keep doing what you're doing. But if you want something different in life, you got to do something different.
The message is grind and hustle away your 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s so you can enjoy your retirement if you're still alive by then. Workaholism, rather than being seen as a sickness, is endowed with personal virtue. In fact, presenteeism was a new term created, the opposite of absenteeism. Its sufferers are neurotically unable to leave the office. We really have to question what kind of world we have created in which we have an economic system where the only ways to make ends meet is to rent out our bodies for most of our lives, underpaid and exploited, engaging in pointless bullshit jobs, with our anger and resentment turned inwards or against each other. So now let's discuss what the effects are of work under capitalism on people and our planet. Juliet Shaw, in the book The Overworked American, lists the consequences as unhappiness, divorce, excessive consumption, and suicide. Many of us are sick all the time, sick in that low-grade, continuous type of way where we forget what it's like to be well. I remember I used to actually always be happy when I was sick because it meant I could finally do nothing for once. Most heart attacks happen on a Monday morning, and the prevalence of work-related ill health has led to the Japanese word karoshi or karoshi, meaning death from overwork. And that isn't even getting into the suffering, starvation, and deaths that ensue from mass unemployment and poverty across the globe. And what is the impact on communities and societies as a whole? The philosopher Socrates famously said that work makes bad community members, family members, and friends. because we have no time to fulfill our responsibilities towards them. And how do our communities in general suffer when our workplace misery is used as a political weapon by the powers that be to funnel us into xenophobia, scapegoating other peoples as the cause of our problems, hatred of the poor, or whatever else they want us to feel? And how many of the most innovative, brilliant, creative beings are never able to develop the capacities to express their genius in meaningful ways because they are locked in endless toil? And how many more global problems like the pandemic or antibiotic resistance would we have solved by now if we didn't have all our time sucked up by work?
By not providing the facilities and the leisure, how many geniuses were unable to make the contributions of which they were capable, to develop the capacities that they had?
I also get frustrated that all our passions, dreams, interests, curiosities are redirected towards what we're doing for our jobs, as opposed to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis with our friends, families, hobbies, and generally thinking about what our contribution is towards the collective of humanity, towards this earth. Why should all our zest and spirit be directed towards what it is that we do for labor?
We don't know all the capacities we have. We don't know all the pleasures awaiting us out there. To explore your own personality, your own interests, to discover new ones and make new friendships.
It's always seemed so strange to me that when you ask anyone what they think the most important things in life are, they will usually say time, freedom, family, relationships. And yet we've all somehow collectively come to accept this economic system that allows basically no time for any such pursuits. In the words of Bob Black, the author of The Abolition of Work, let's pretend for a moment that work doesn't turn people into stultified, submissive. Let's pretend, in defense of any plausible psychology and the ideology of its boosters, that it has no effect on the formation of character. And let's pretend that work isn't as boring and tiring and humiliating as we all know it really is. Even then, work would still make a mockery of all humanistic and democratic aspirations just because it usurps so much of our time. When people talk about abolishing or overthrowing work, it can leave us with a real sense of unease about what might come afterwards. It's easy to feel frustrated about the current system, but people who call for revolution all too rarely define what that might actually look like. It makes the future seem scary and unpredictable. Who knows what kind of nightmare might fill the void? I, of course, don't have all the answers, but I would like to give a general overview of what great thinkers I've read have suggested could follow. Firstly, we can get rid of a great proportion of the work we currently do, like advertising, corporate law, and weapons development, because most of it is either useless or harmful.
And I think it's pretty obvious. It's just like, fire all those guys, that'll work.
For the jobs that remain, labor-saving tech can be used to reduce the working day to a couple of hours per person, distributing necessary labor more evenly among the working population and maintaining full employment.
I think that we need to massively reevaluate this. If we're going to take off again, we need to start thinking about what makes work actually valuable, which is that it's a form of care for other people. It benefits people in a concrete way.
Workplaces can be collectivized, meaning that instead of one owner, Industries are under the control and direction of workers who can democratically decide how it is to be run, the structure of the day, what the goals are, how to organize production, and how to distribute the money it brings in.
The world where people have a better relationship to work is a world where working people have more of the power, where we have as much control over what we do as possible, where the people who make the thing have some say in what is made and how they make it.
Everyone could decide for themselves what work they most enjoy based on their gifts and interests and passions. Boring and terrible jobs could be distributed on rotation until automation makes them redundant. And perhaps even the most tedious jobs could, under different circumstances, actually become enjoyable. For example, most people would hate to be a cleaner as a profession, but if there's a social meaning attached to it, people often do it willingly, even joyfully. We saw this in Tahrir Square during the revolution of 2011. Thousands of people volunteered to wash the streets and pick up rubbish.
We need to make a better country. We need to make our country the best. So it will never be the best without our work and our contribution.
And although most of us don't want to clean all day long, 9 to 5, many people talk about cleaning a few hours a week having therapeutic benefits. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that work that currently sucks can be gratifying if the context changes. And people often assume that if we didn't have incentives like homelessness and poverty, no one would want to work, everyone would be lazy, and society would fall apart. But I think most people would agree that some sort of meaningful, fulfilling work that gives life purpose, progress, and direction is important for the human spirit. Very few of us are genuinely happy letting our inner sloth loose for too long. I also think people make these assumptions because the only form of work we know is a capitalist one. Of course, people are going to cut corners and be lazy in a social context where we are overworked, underpaid, and mostly performing pointless bullshit jobs. I think a workplace structure based on communality, cooperation, egalitarianism, and that is actually doing meaningful work, provides great incentives and values for work. Work would be an act of love as a gift to our communities. You answer to your co-workers. You are in this together, working for the well-being of society. We are part of something bigger than ourselves. The liberation from endless overwork could also free up more energy and bandwidth for creativity and innovation, caring for others and solving some of the world's biggest problems like climate catastrophe. We would have vastly more time for play, family, friendships, and meaningful communal activities. If we lived in such a way that our basic needs were met and not forced to work based on external incentives, we could be far more in touch with our interests, feelings, passions, and the gifts that we bring to this world, and we could allow those things to inform and illuminate the actions that we take. Instead of becoming bored with the repetition of the same tasks again and again, we could each have multiple roles in our lives. As the philosopher Karl Marx wrote, in a communist society where nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished by any branch he wishes, society regulates the general production and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, shepherd, or critic. When I mention all this to other people, the usual response I get is, well, that sounds lovely and utopian, but human nature would never allow it. Work in its current form is inevitable, unavoidable, and necessary. But this isn't actually the case at all. The capitalist way of organizing life is actually incredibly new. For tens of hundreds of years of human history, we worked cooperatively 2 to 4 hours a day, and the rest of the time was spent playing, resting, or spending time with family and friends.
So hunter-gatherer societies didn't have this kind of obsession with work that we do, this idea of having to work 60 hours, this obsession with productivity, growth, with solving the economic problem. Instead, they led lives which were dominated primarily by what we might call leisure time. They only worked, on average, around 15 to 17 hours a week. And this is even in the toughest environments, like the Kalahari Desert. And what this says to me is that we as a species, we have the sense that we're somehow hardwired to work, that our lives are bereft of purpose and meaning if we don't work. But the evidence of hunter-gatherer societies suggests to us that we're not hardwired to work. Somehow we have the sense that, if we don't have work, we're nothing. But hunter-gatherer societies suggest that actually we're a different kind of creature altogether.
Still today, many Indigenous people across the globe do not work for more than 4 hours a day and don't consider work to be work. We can see this time and time again across cultures and histories.
It suggests that actually our options for the future, in particular, now that there's all this panic about automation, are actually, far more interesting than they appear to be. It's going to rob us of our jobs, they're panicking. Bill Gates is saying we must tax automata as if they're humans and retrain people to do more work. For me, the question is when you take the long view of human history, actually it suggests, shouldn't we be looking at this as an opportunity to entirely reimagine our relationship with work and the workplace? And in doing so, ultimately try and reimagine our relationship more broadly with our planet and one another.
So contrary to the idea that to dream of alternative work is ludicrous, it would seem the opposite is the case. It's actually the modern capitalist work structure and world system that for most of human history would have seemed impossible, unrealistic, and outright draconian. Getting to this better world will require work from all of us. It requires work to resuscitate our imaginative muscles, to come up with new visions, new sources of hope. It requires work to remember our histories, to look to our ancestors and traditions across the globe, to learn about other ways of living and being.
Do you think, things are like this, they're always, these people can't be changed, people since time immemorial, all these systems no, they haven't. We have lost our history. We have forgotten who we are. We must remember who we are.
It requires work to organize collectively in unions, strikes, and protests. You're not going to see it covered much in mainstream news, but across industries, public backing for unions is at a decades high. It requires the work of social experimentation, just as it's the norm to work on endless techno experiments. We need to also be prepared to trial and error how we live and organize society.
Approach it as an engineer would. You look for solutions, you experiment with them, and you are prepared for those experiments to fail. And we are at this point of such astonishing productivity that we are in a position to actually take some pretty radical experiments in the way we organize our societies.
It requires work to do some homework, look into useful resources like the Workers of the World website, books like Breaking Things That Work, Work Without the Worker, Less is More, Mutual Aid, and Why You Should Be a Trade Unionist that can inspire us and give us concrete, practical steps forward. It requires work to bring about a profound shift in our consciousnesses, to decolonize our hearts and minds around how we think about work. What healing do we still need to do around our relationship to work? What messages have we internalized about our worth and value being tied to work and productivity? What norms and values do we take for granted around work? And how can we challenge ourselves on that? It also requires work from us to figure out what are our contributions to the collective of humanity. Something life is calling into us that is in alignment with the most liberated, embodied, and authentic version of ourselves. In a world no longer burdened by an excess of useless industries and a mass of exploited people, it is not only us individually, but also our living world, our communities, our relationships to each other and the earth that can be liberated. In the core of us, the deepest, quietest, most disavowed parts of ourselves, whether you call it God, gut instinct, inner wisdom, or soul, I believe this is the work we are all truly, deeply longing to do. Thank you so much for listening to me. If you gained something from this video, some of the ways you could help me out is by liking, subscribing, leaving a comment or sharing this video, or leaving a one-time tip in the PayPal tip jar, or becoming a monthly patron. I'm at a point now where I've decided I'm giving myself until the end of this year to dedicate all my time, energy, resources purely into doing YouTube without other work. And if at that point I can make it sustainable, then I will either use this as my part-time or full-time job, or if not, then I'm going to have to go back to full employment. But I'm giving it this last little shot. So if you've ever considered becoming a patron, now would be a great time to do it. But no pressure, you know what is best for you. I would love to hear in the comment section your experiences with work and liberating yourselves from work. If you're interested in my specific work experiences for a Member of Parliament, Green consultancy, NGOs, waitressing, etc., then I made a blog for patrons that I will link in the description box. I make monthly vlogs about different thoughts, reflections, ideas that are alive in me at this time, things that I wouldn't put out publicly. I also co-host with Mexi monthly Discord calls to discuss whatever topics the community decides upon, as well as a monthly book club for community members. And there's also a Discord that you can have access to if you're interested in joining our conversations. Thank you so much to my current patrons for helping me to do this work that brings me so much joy and fulfillment and meaning in life. I really appreciate you so much.